welcome to this week's episode of Not D&D, brought to you by EN World. As always, I am your host, Jessica, and joining this week, we have Spencer Moore. Spencer, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Excellent. I'm excited to talk about your game. So we're going to be talking about Chasing Adventure this week. We are recording live, so if you have any questions and you're watching live, hello, thank you for joining us. Feel free to pop them in the chat and get involved. G'day, geeks, yes, and g'day to you as well. We've got in the comments already, but let us know if you have any questions about the game. We'll be happy to answer them. Also, if you're listening to the podcast, hello, all the links we're talking about will be in the show notes. So, Spencer, we're going to talk about Chasing Adventure, obviously, but beforehand, I'd like to talk about you, because you've had your first crowdfunding project, you've got your first game out there, and it's gone really successfully, so congratulations. So I wanted to talk about your journey in role-playing games. So I always start the interview by asking the guest if you remember what your first experience was, or the first game that you played, your tabletop role-playing game.
Yep. So I got into role-playing games after in 2012, after a YouTuber I followed started doing actual plays, and I was like, oh, this sounds fun. I could do this.
Yeah.
I discovered Roll20 online, used the LFG forum to find a group, and started playing Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition using the Lost Minds of Phandelver adventure.
Oh,
I believe
classic
that
adventure.
all of us were either brand new or relatively new at the time. And from there on, we the group. That group doesn't meet together. No issues. We just kind of spread out.
Sure.
But we branched out into all sorts of games: Pathfinder, Dungeon World, Stars Without Number, and we just kept kind of branching out into all sorts of different games.
Amazing.
Nowadays,
what made you folks want to try all different games? Because I know so many tables get stuck playing D&D all the time, and like, what was it about the group you think that everyone just so up for exploring? Or
so all of those games are ones that I didn't put entirely new groups together for, but partly new groups.
Okay.
My first group started with 4th edition. The GM didn't like the magic items that they could give us in 4th edition, and they saw Pathfinder had more interesting ones, so they said, let's switch to Pathfinder.
Okay.
We played that for a couple of years, and then I personally was the one pushing for more different games, starting with Dungeon World, and then making my own groups for other games since.
Perfect. But yeah. Oh, so where did you go from there? Like playing Dungeon World a lot, were you saying?
Yeah, I did. I discovered it and played a lot of it GMing. I think my first major GMing experience was a Dungeon World campaign. Looking back, of course, no one ever calls their first campaign good, but it wasn't bad.
Yeah.
Which I would say is decent. Is good for a first campaign. But shortly after that, I formed and was part of a group that is still going to this day, though the people sometimes rotate in and out. But the primary purpose of that group is to play and review different games.
Nice.
So we have been intentionally switching games, usually every few months, doing a mini campaign of that game for 6 to 12 sessions. Reviewing it. All of this is live streamed, though not the main purpose of this show. But we kind of do a review, talk about it, like, here's our thoughts, and then switch to a new game. So, like, we just finished up Masks yesterday, for example.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fab.
So with a group sorry about that. With a group where, like, all of us really want to try all sorts of different games, it's really helpful, and we rotate who's the GM, and it's been really nice.
Amazing. Yeah, it's totally on the ethos with this show as well, of the idea of, hey, there's so many great games to try out there. So I love it when I meet someone else that is all about trying different games and things like that. So it sounds awesome that you as a GM and a player, you're exactly the type of person I like to have at my table that wants to try new stuff. But how did you go from somebody that just enjoys playing games and running games to where you are now with a published game that's, you're speaking to printers about getting it printed and proofreading and stuff? What was that journey?
It was gradual. My game design journey started years ago when I started making, like, I think it started with custom playbooks, actually, for Dungeon World itself. I had a couple.
Okay.
And it started with, I'll just make a few small things. The book teaches you how to make custom moves, which is that's your first step in game design. And many Powered by the Apocalypse games talk about how to start game designing for them, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Then I kind of just kept getting doing a bit more or doing a bigger project. The big thing that was the big first step to chasing adventure was actually someone contacted me. They were looking for a GM for an animated Dungeon World show, but they wanted the sessions to be like an hour long only, but a full adventure an hour long. So
Okay.
I going in was like, I can do this, but we're gonna need to trim some fat in Dungeon World to make a cohesive adventure an hour long. So I just started
Sure.
taking scissors to the game, and
Mm-hmm.
that was what ended up being the first draft of what is now called Chasing Adventure. The animated show didn't end up going anywhere, but it was basically the first playtest is what it ended up being
Mm-hmm.
of the game. As I kept refining it and figuring out what works, when playing the game, what are what are the pauses. One
Mm-hmm.
obvious example in Dungeon World is you roll once to do a move, and then you roll again for damage if you're fighting. Um,
Sure.
and that was one of the first things I looked at is I don't feel that I should need to roll twice um, to see how one action goes narratively.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then it just kind of kept snowballing.
Amazing. So the game, like you say, it started, the inspiration was Dungeon World, but edited down. But now it's something kind of different. I think you mentioned, is it powered by the Apocalypse with on the Kickstarter, and it's its own system very much? Is
It
that?
is.
Yeah.
Powered by the Apocalypse, I would call it the closest thing would be a mixture between Dungeon World and Masks.
Mm-hmm.
It uses conditions. I wouldn't say this. I wouldn't say identically to people familiar with Masks or some other Powered by the Apocalypse games, but instead of HP and instead of damage or things like that, yeah, you mark conditions. You roll 2d6. Most of the rules are structured in terms of moves, fictional trigger, mechanical procedure, back into narrative effect.
Mm-hmm.
So that is those are the familiar
Mm-hmm.
pillars
Yeah.
or commonplace design tropes of Powered by the
Perfect.
Apocalypse.
Well, we'll dig into that a little bit more, but just to give us a top view to zoom back out. So, if folks haven't heard of Chasing Adventure, as I mentioned, it successfully funded back in April on Kickstarter. At the moment, you're in the process of doing the print and finalizing everything. But if people didn't come across the Kickstarter and they're hearing about it for the first time, what is Chasing Adventure?
So, Chasing Adventure is a fantasy adventure game about fast action and hard choices.
Mm-hmm.
Players take on the roles of formidable would-be heroes,
Mm-hmm.
seeking glory, treasure, knowledge, maybe atonement or something more.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they you play as what would be familiar archetypes that you kind of make your own,
Mm-hmm.
um, and play through an experience that I would describe as truly it is what people think Dungeons and Dragons plays like before they've ever played it, if that
Okay.
makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
When you hear about someone talking about Dungeons and Dragons or their story of their campaign or things like that, where
Mm-hmm.
we usually will summarize like 6 months of uh, battle map sessions into 15 minutes of an epic like adventure.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Chasing Adventure, while you are playing it, feels a lot like you're just experiencing that in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Um,
So, in terms of complexity, if somebody where would it be on the scale? Like if somebody's played D&D, how they compare it to that, or even is it good for somebody who's never played any tabletop games before? What level of complexity is the game?
Chasing Adventure, I would say I do recommend it for people who've never played tabletop role playing games before.
Mm-hmm.
There's a few different types of people in terms of their game preferences, assumptions, things like that. Some people might
Mm-hmm.
take a lot of video game assumptions into it if they're experienced with that into
Sure.
Chasing Adventure. And that won't always work because there is no strict turn order. Damage isn't really a thing numerically.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to enjoy this narrative, improv acting focus with mechanics to support you, it can be really good. I played it with lots of people who've never played a role-playing game before. They've all enjoyed it. I played it with people who are Pathfinder veterans. They've enjoyed it too.
Great.
Yeah.
So what were the design principles when you were approaching the game? Like, what did you want it to, the mechanics to achieve to support a certain style of play?
Dramatic scenes, hard choices, and fast action.
Nice. I like all those ideas.
Yeah, I wanted to continue. Yeah.
No, carry on. So I think I've
wanted
got a
to
bit of lag,
feel-
so sorry if I talk over
No
you.
problem. That's how internet calls work. I wanted it to feel like certain fantasy action movies or certain scenes during them. I bring it up in the book, and I bring it up also when talking about the game as well. I bring up certain scenes from the Lord of the Rings movies, the Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves movie, lots of cinematic, usually action scenes, but not always. But either way, dramatic and important. And that's what this game is emulating.
Fantastic. And talking about the world a little bit, so the inspiration. So what you mentioned that you wanted it to feel like kind of that high risk kind of cinematic element. What sort of world are we walking through that creates that environment?
So Chasing Adventure is very much you're intended to define your own world to a degree. There are several sections in the book that talk about what participating in a group means. If you choose a wizard playbook, then you might start talking about what magic even means. If no one has any type of character that can do magic, then if the group wants it, maybe magic doesn't exist in the world and it's more of a historical fantasy. There are procedures in the game that walk the group through defining and adding important details to the world during the first session of play. Each playbook will ask specific questions that the player can decide. So one example would be the Paladin. They will be asked, I believe, top of my head, what corruptible authority, what fallible authority rules over these lands. So that's the player of the Paladin gets to add a detail about the world during the first session. And this is obviously engaging with the themes of the Paladin narratively. It is about how to handle authority to a degree.
Yeah.
And there are every playbook has at least one of these questions that allow the players to collectively create the world.
Love that. I love that. Is there like a rogue sort of player and archetype? Because that's normally what I play. I'm curious about what the setup for that is.
They're a thief.
Oh, excellent.
So they have two big things. One is poison, which is they are familiar with it. They can create it. They start with some. But the other thing they get to do is whether you are framed or truly a criminal, you are wanted by the law. So there's always someone hounding you. But this also gives you something called heat. And you can basically gain heat. Inspired by Blades in the Dark in a way. And you can gain heat in order to push yourself more and do more that other playbooks might not otherwise be able to do.
Cool.
When your heat reaches a threshold, people show up and try to capture you.
Oh, okay.
So it's it very much is that risk and reward kind of thing where if you want to keep your head down and don't want to get touched by the law, you're fine, but you can take that heat instead of other consequences.
I like that. That's interesting. I like the element of different consequences for things you do and player options. It sounds like with character creation, it really obviously benefits from everyone doing that collaboratively together. So how long would character creation take, and how is it simple? Is it complex? What does it look like?
If you're familiar with the system, you can make a character in 10 minutes. But for most of my experiences with people who've never encountered anything but the system before, just walked in and, to a in-person actual play, seeing a bunch of sheets on the table and being like, what is this? That is roughly an hour and a half max, and that's including talking about things, explaining them, going through those questions I mentioned. It was intentionally designed to be fast to get started. Every character playbook starts with one of 3 backgrounds to choose from that sort of details your, let's call it, sub-archetype. So for the thief, for example, you can either start as a criminal, treasure hunter, or trickster background. And they have a few, each of those is sort of a package. It's not the only choice you make when creating your character, but it is the biggest one.
Okay.
That speeds it up.
Yeah, I think that's that amount of time feels really nice to do a session 0 before your campaign. And as you're talking about, the players get to decide a lot about the world, so it makes sense that you could sit there, create the characters, have so many prompts, and then carry on doing a bit of world building before your first ever kind of campaign.
Yeah, in some of my own campaigns, that is exactly what happened. Some sessions have been we jump right into the adventure. Some groups have preferred to spend an entire 4-hour session creating characters and then just adding more details to the world. It is flexible for both.
Perfect. And speaking of running the game, so the game is, as you mentioned, it's accessible to people that are new to playing role-playing games. I noticed in the book you have a lot of guidance for GMs as well. So would you say this is a flexible system for people new to running games?
I hope so. I wrote it to be so.
Yeah.
I think when it comes to GM advice and GM sections, it to a degree will depend on the reader. Or some people won't really click with certain bits of advice. All that said, I wrote the chapter with to the person who has never GM'd before. Here are the exact moment-to-moment things you do as a GM. Here's why you want to do them. Here's how preparation would work and why you would want to do it. And sometimes you wouldn't want to prepare certain things, and sometimes you would. And here are a bunch of different pieces of advice for different situations you might encounter during the game.
Gorgeous. And you've got lots of different table generators for loads of different things, which is always so handy for a GM on the fly if you're looking for something. If your players have done something that you didn't expect them to go and you haven't prepped something, that's a great way to go. Do you want to talk a little bit about kind of those different options that are in the book, what people get?
Yeah. So these tables and generators are inspired by a combination of Blades in the Dark tables and generators, but also Apocalypse World, where in Apocalypse World, there's frequently some of the culture around the game has established these recurring characters with these names that keep repeating, where everyone's like, oh yeah, in my campaign, this person's name was this. And in my campaign, this person's name was a totally different character. And so there's that familiarity in a way with this idea of this character. Tables and generators kind of try to emulate that balance between creative customization and a familiar touchstone. I want to inspire you, but not restrict you. To that end, there are generators and tables for adventures, friends, locations, enemies, treasures, and magic items, which are different from treasures because not everyone will want to handle them the same way.
Okay, interestingly, how so?
So magic items as something you would find, and the book goes into this, can vary drastically in power. You can have, let's go with Lord of the Rings, Sting is a magic item that narratively not a huge deal. Like it comes up sometimes. Its most useful feature is actually the fact that it glows in advance more than anything else, and otherwise it's kind of just a normal knife. The Ring of Power is also a magic item, and it's a much bigger deal.
Sure.
And they can all range between everything in terms of what is a magic item can vary drastically. And so if I look at my magic item generator, I have tables for what it looks like, what it does, what its tie to the world is, what kind of cost or risk it might come with.
Mm-hmm.
The magic item table and what it can mean to have them in your game varies hugely depending on group preference. Do you want them to
Sure.
be purchasable? Do you want them to only be rare and found occasionally?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want them to be able to be manually created?
Mm-hmm.
So I try to account for all of that with Chasing Adventure, depending on how you want to use them.
Beautiful. And do you have an example of a favorite magic item you have?
So I think I have, there's a lot of contenders,
Sure.
but Child's Play
Mm-hmm.
is a heavy yellow scarf sewn with the words, I can't see you, you can't see me. And whenever you wear it as a blindfold and you cannot see, you are invisible. This actually isn't my own magic item. I have permission to add this to the game from a
Oh
Reddit
yeah.
user, Lich
Okay.
Kicker One. They're mentioned
Nice.
in the contributors. Um,
Mm-hmm.
they created it, and it is just very simple but interesting with that drawback of not being able to see to use it.
Yeah, it's very fun thematically as well, and yeah, I like that. So it sounds like there's a real community around this game of people contributing things. Are there a lot of contributors to the book from online communities?
The book itself, what this is primarily a solo project in terms of the writing and design
Mm-hmm.
within the book itself. That said, the Chasing Adventure would not be nearly as good and honestly refined as it is without years now of
Mm-hmm.
feedback, questions, and interest from other people who have been
Mm-hmm.
talking about it, asking about it. People are making, I think now there's several custom playbooks for it.
Oh, nice.
There are people who are doing their own house rules, people who are making their own content. One person I recently heard about is making a Cowboy Bebop inspired hack of the game, which I think is
Okay.
very cool.
Yeah, love that.
So it has been invaluable. Um,
Perfect.
as I said, while the book itself was technically me,
Mm-hmm.
um, it is invisibly held together by many other people as well.
And if people are wanting to tap into this community, is Discord the best way to get in touch and get involved with the conversation that's already happening?
Yes. So we have a Discord channel. That is the, if you want to get in touch immediately, there are things for talking about GMing, talking about game design. There's an Ask the Designer channel where you can ask me questions about the game.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people in there engaging with it. I think there's every couple of days we have a new discussion about some aspect of the game.
Beautiful.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, so if you're not watching this live and you have a question, that Discord is the place to go. If you're watching live and have a question, of course, put it in the comments. But if you're listening to the podcast, that'll be the place to go. Links are in the show notes. Beautiful. So you talked about treasures as well on the table. I was wondering if you had a favorite kind of treasure instead of magic item, or any interesting things that you did with treasures different from magic items.
Mm-hmm. So, just like in lots of adventure stories, treasures can be all sorts of things, like what you find at the end of a dungeon or in a dragon's
Mm-hmm.
hoard. So they're split into different categories. There's 6 categories, each with 6 items within them. I'm not going to list them all, but one
Sure.
example would be you might find an important individual. That's one
Mm-hmm.
category.
Yeah.
And let's say you find an exotic companion, a child or egg of a mythical creature. What surprises are there when raising it? Many of the generators will ask you a question when you get the result on the table, prompting
Mm-hmm.
you to add your own creativity into the answer. Like I said before.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Nice. I like that. That's a bit different from just X amount of gold or a gem. That
yeah.
sounds something a bit more interesting narratively to help push the story forward. Um, Speaking about stories, generally Chasing Adventure has the sense that it is a collaborative adventure with a group of people going out, into the world. We've all experienced in a campaign though where things have gone a bit askew, and maybe there's some player versus player hostilities going on, and sometimes not all rule books have a kind of structure or a what to do for the GM in this situation. But I noticed that you did put something in case this happened. So could you talk through how that works?
Yeah, so this is present in the full version of the game. Several pages and a multi-page example is given to PvP, because oftentimes when you hear about situations where a group falls apart, there's a large amount of times where it happens because of in-character PvP. It can cause issues when not handled properly, and I have been lucky enough to experience it handled very well and very satisfyingly for everyone involved multiple times with the right group and right approach. Biggest thing with PvP every time is that everyone at the table is fully bought into it, fully interested in it, and working together as players to tell a story where their characters might be against each other.
Sure.
It makes a large amount of use of usually dramatic irony, with you knowing a lot more information than your character does, and not just being okay with that, but having more fun because of that. So the chapter in Chasing Adventure goes through a highly recommended procedure, which I'll summarize as firstly, you guys all talk about the situation when it would happen. Make sure everything's good. When you start with the PvP, alternate the perspective. As a Powered by the Apocalypse game, Chasing Adventure is only one side rolls. The players roll, the GM doesn't roll. That's hard to do when PvPing. And so part of the procedure is you alternate who is the one rolling when people are fighting against each other. And then as the situation develops, keep in mind what a reasonable solution would be. All the player characters should still resolve the situation as allies. Maybe not friends, maybe only for now allies. But the game can't how to put this? The game is meant to be a group of allies adventuring together and sometimes like stopping other ominous forces in the world. Your characters need to be willing to work together with others, and these PvP situations are supposed to be the dramatic and interesting exceptions to those. But once you're ready to close it off and say, okay, that's the end of this scene, find a way to justify you guys all still working together afterwards.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's really, really solid advice, and it's great to hear that. Another thing I wanted to talk about in the game, because it was one of the first things that drew me in, was it's very pretty. So the artwork and the cover, and throughout the book, you've got these really gorgeous art pieces. Could you talk a little bit about what you wanted from the game's visual design and who's responsible for it?
So I've been actually pretty picky with what I wanted the art to look like. I spent over a year like looking for the right artists, sometimes contacting some artists who I wanted to commission, but they weren't available for commissions, things like that. What I ended up settling on were a few different artists found on Adobe stock images. These are licensed from there. However, they were licensed before the rise of AI art, which has been quite convenient to remove a worry from my plate in terms of AI art creation tools came out within sometimes one of them was a couple days, but it just released. The rise of them was a few months after I licensed and downloaded these images from a few specific users. I really like their art. They have a lot of other illustrations that are great. Their usernames on Adobe are Grand Failure, one word, and I'm not going to be able to pronounce this right. I'm going to put it in chat, but it is
Okay.
Lucishan.
Okay.
Louisishan.
Okay. Excellent.
So if you search those names on Adobe, you will find their information. I believe at least one of them, maybe both, have since these images transitioned to some of their art they do nowadays is AI generated, but I do know for a fact none of the images I'm using here are.
Okay.
And Adobe is very useful in that I don't know how reliable it is, but they do actually label any art that is AI generated as such.
Yeah, I know that's important to some people to know whether or not a project uses that. So it's great that you have
Yeah.
that clarity and information behind it.
I'm
Because
a bit relieved, in all honesty,
yeah,
that I was able to avoid that wave.
yes, excellent. So hey, if people have listened to what you've said and found it interesting, where is the project currently? Because I mentioned that you successfully funded on Kickstarter. Congratulations, back in April. So where is the project now? Like,
Yeah, thank you. The project is being printed now. I expect it will be done well before the end of the year. Hopefully, later this summer is when I hope to have everything fulfilled and sent out.
lovely.
I'm currently communicating with the printer, and the printing process is ongoing and going well. So I can't give an exact date for when I'll receive the books yet, but I do have a
Sure.
soft date privately, and it is looking good.
Excellent. That's great to hear. And if people are watching Not D&D or listening to the podcast now and they weren't a Kickstarter backer, how can they get involved and get a copy of the game? Is that still possible?
So there are digital copies available on itch, on DriveThruRPG, on ChasingAdventureGame.com. There are two versions of the game digitally. There's the free version. You have everything you need to play, everything you need to GM.
Perfect.
That's free for everyone. There's a paid version with those magic items, generators, and tables that we talked about. The advanced play chapter that includes the PvP situation that we talked about. That's all in there. That's $20, but totally optional. The physical hardcover version that is coming soon will, once the Kickstarter has been fulfilled and everything is ironed out and 100% good with that, all remaining spare copies of the game, which I do expect to have several, will be put up for sale on the Chasing Adventure website. I can't. Some people have been asking about a future print to order, and that is something I'd like to do, but it's not something I can guarantee as I haven't actively done research or preparation for it yet. But it is something that I would like to do in the future.
Great. And but it's a big old book. It's like 200 pages or something?
It is, yeah, 214 is what it's
Yes.
printing at right now.
So it's not a little print zine. It's a big tome. So
I should have brought. I actually printed out I have a physical proof with me in the other room, unfortunately, so I can't go get it. But yeah, it's solid.
excellent. So like, a certain amount of bludgeoning damage or something with it. Good to know.
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, so yeah, please do check out those links. Download the free version or the digital version if any of this was interested to you. Because the best way to support indie tabletop RPG creators is to buy their stuff. So Spencer, we're coming up near to the end of our time in our talk. Is there anything we haven't covered in the game that you want to make sure we talk about, or any kind of closing thoughts about it you'd like to share?
I think if I was to talk about Chasing Adventure, there's a few things it does that I don't see in many other games. One is it has rules that are specific for chase scenes, where there is let's call it an anti-system of sorts, where depending on how long you want a chase scene to go, you can bet between 1 and 3 edge is what it's called. And you gain or lose or both. You gain, or you're the person that you're running away from or chasing after gains it, depending on how the roll goes. They gain that amount, and the system works really well for having a chase scene that fits like the beginning of the Aladdin movie, if you want something that's cut quite light, or running away from an avalanche or an exploding volcano if you want something that's more dramatic. I think it's very flexible, and I haven't seen a lot of satisfying chase mechanics.
Sure.
I think if I was to talk about anything else, it would probably be the influence system. Influence isn't actually what it's called. That's from Masks. Favor is what it's called in Chasing Adventure.
Okay. Yeah, tell me about that.
So in Chasing Adventure, there is a degree of your word mattering when you promise something or when you owe someone something. Favor is an unintentionally flexible term. So how you treat someone when you favor them is kind of up to you. Someone might try to avoid someone that they favor because they might feel embarrassed. Someone might grovel before them or go out of their way to give them something. All sorts of things like that. But it kind of binds people together as a way to, you can make promises to people and say that you will favor them if they do something for you, and that will help you potentially with some roles. You can, there's a move in the game called Connect where you can retroactively say that you know someone and go looking for them to help you in a situation. If you say that you favor them and you already owe them something, that will help you in that and will then make everything more interesting.
Yeah.
All that said, if you act against someone that you favor, if you basically if you already favor someone but very specifically do something against them anyways, it is very likely to come back to bite you. There's a role involved, and there's either another cost, other people who would favor you stop doing so because they hear about it, or things like that. On the other hand, if you go help people you favor, you get rewarded by the game for experience or healing or information or mutual help. It's a system that is intentionally as central to the game as you want it to be. If people are not interested in engaging socially with others, you can largely ignore it and you won't miss it. But if you do want to engage in a session or a campaign that is all about politics or some kind of other social ties between people, then it will come into play a lot. And I hope satisfyingly it has been for me.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for sharing those bits there. So again, I will reiterate that if any of this has sounded interesting to you, on chasingadventure.com/free, there is a free version of this you can download to learn more. And of course, chasingadventuregame.com/game is where you can get the digital version now, and hardcovers later this year once Kickstarter fulfillment is complete. Spencer, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about the game. Really, really pleased to see it do well on Kickstarter and getting out there. So it's always so exciting to see with new creators. I do have one more question for you that I ask everyone before we wrap up. And that's if you have any recommendations for any other tabletop RPGs. And the rule is it can't be a game that you've made, and it cannot be DnD.
I have 3, 2.5.
Oh, go on then. I'll allow it.
Okay. So the first one I'm going to say is one that people have been talking about already, but it's just been stuck in my head. Lancer is a mech tactics game that has some of the best customization that I have ever seen when it comes to encouraging experimentation and having interesting in-the-moment combat decisions. My other recommendation is 2 smaller games, both that share the same purpose. So if anyone has ever wanted to play Burning Wheel but been put off by some of the various complexities or other things around it, there are 2 much simpler games that still embody the same feeling of character and belief focused drama, but simpler and easier to play. One is called the Gold Hack, and one is called Hot Circle. The Gold Hack is Burning Wheel meets the Black Hack. That's why it's called that. And Hot Circle is kind of like that meets Fate. I have played and enjoyed both a lot, and even if I had to pick between the two, I don't know if I easily could. They both have they're both great, and they both have small differences in strengths and weaknesses. But if you want to play Burning Wheel light, highly recommend both of them.
That's excellent. That's some great recommendations. Thank you so much. With Lancer, we have got had them on the show as a guest, if I can get my words out. So if folks are interested in learning more about that, we've had them on the show. So there's a previous episode of Not D&D, so you can listen to that. And maybe ideas for future guests with those other two there for me as well. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show, Spencer. It's been really great hearing about the game. I'm really excited to see what you do next as well after Chasing Adventure. And to everybody that's watched and listened, thank you so much for coming along. We will be back next week. We'll be talking about Rune Cairn by Odin's Beard for another indie tabletop RPG to introduce you to. But that's all for this week. So thanks very much, folks. Goodbye.